The first time you notice it, it is almost embarrassing how small it looks. A message left unanswered. A favor you said yes to when your body already knew it was too much. A quiet apology you offered before anyone had even asked for one. A room where you smiled a little too long, listened a little too carefully, and left feeling strangely empty, as if something invisible had been taken from you while you were trying to be kind. That is how it begins for many people. Not with cruelty, not with a dramatic betrayal, but with a habit so polished that you mistake it for goodness. You become the person who understands, the person who softens the edge, the person who explains, forgives, absorbs, adjusts, waits. You become the one who makes everything easier for everyone else. And at first that can feel noble, clean, mature, safe. But then one day you sit in the car after a conversation, or stand in the kitchen after a call, or lie awake in bed with the phone face down beside you, and you realize you do not feel kind anymore. You feel used. Or maybe that word is too sharp, too final. Maybe what you feel is more confusing than that. Maybe you feel tired in a way sleep does not fix. Tired in the bones, tired in the chest, tired of being the one who keeps the emotional weather stable while everyone else gets to be unpredictable. And if you have lived like this long enough, you may not even notice the moment kindness becomes self-abandonment. You just notice that you are always the one making room, always the one shrinking a little, always the one translating someone else's discomfort into your own responsibility. That is the door. Not because kindness is wrong, not because compassion is a weakness, but because kindness, when it stops being conscious, can become the exact path through which you leave yourself behind. And this is where the psychological pattern begins to matter. Carl Jung would have recognized something important here, because what looks like generosity on the surface can sometimes be a persona, a mask, a social self built so carefully that even you start to believe it is your true nature, the good one, the easy one, the understanding one, the one who never makes things difficult, the one who can be counted on to smooth over tension, to forgive the sharp word, to answer the late-night text, to explain the hurt in a way that protects the other person from feeling too bad about causing it. A persona is not fake in the simple sense. It is often built from something real, real empathy, real sensitivity, real longing to keep connection alive. But when a persona becomes your identity, it stops serving life and starts consuming it. Then, being nice is no longer a choice. It is a role you cannot seem to step out of without guilt. And guilt, for many people, is the real chain. Not the relationship itself, not the difficult person, not even the pattern of giving too much. It is the guilt that rises the moment you consider a boundary. The guilt that says, if I stop explaining, I am cruel. If I stop helping, I am selfish. If I stop carrying this, I am abandoning them. If I say no, I will become the kind of person I never wanted to be. That voice feels moral, but often it is only familiar. And that is one of the cruelest tricks of the unconscious. It can make a wound feel like character. You do not say, I was trained to overextend myself. You say, I am just a naturally giving person. You do not say, I learned to stay available to avoid rejection. You say, I hate disappointing people. You do not say, my nervous system equates boundaries with danger. You say, I overthink everything. But the body knows the difference. The body knows when you are being loving and when you are performing loveliness to keep the peace. The body knows when your yes is full and when it is a reflex. The body knows when you are helping and when you are disappearing. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being emotionally responsible for too many people. It is not the exhaustion of labor, it is the exhaustion of vigilance. You are always reading the room, always measuring tone, always anticipating the next need, always trying to prevent the next disappointment before it happens. That kind of life can make you very good at surviving other people. It is less good at helping you survive yourself. And if this sounds harsh, it is only because the pattern is harsh. The pattern does not announce itself as a trap. It arrives dressed as virtue. It says, be the bigger person. It says, keep the peace. It says, don't be difficult. It says, they are going through something. It says, you can handle it. It says, you are the strong one. The strong one. Another beautiful phrase that can become a cage, because once you are cast as the strong one, your pain becomes less visible. People lean on you more because you seem able to carry more. They do not always mean harm. Sometimes they are simply unconscious. They take what is offered. They get used to your availability. They begin to assume your patience is endless. And if there is a manipulative dynamic in the room, it often feeds on exactly that assumption. Not always through obvious abuse, sometimes through subtle emotional control, through guilt, through confusion, through making your kindness feel like the thing that keeps the relationship alive, while your actual needs are treated as inconvenient, dramatic, or too much. Through making you feel that the moment you ask for reciprocity, you are suddenly the problem. This is where many empathic people become trapped in a loop that does not look dramatic from the outside, but feels devastating from the inside. You give, you are misunderstood. You explain, you are drained. You give again. You feel guilty for being drained. You give again, hoping this time your care will finally be enough to create safety. But safety cannot be built on self-erasure. And here is where Jung becomes important in a more uncomfortable way. Because the pattern is not only about the other person, it is also about what in you keeps returning to the same role. That does not mean you caused the dysfunction. It means something in your inner world recognizes the role and knows how to play it. A complex, a repeated emotional knot, the kind of knot that forms early, when love and responsibility get tangled together. When you learn that being easy makes life smoother. When you learn that your feelings are less important than the temperature of the room. When you learn that other people's discomfort must be managed quickly, or else something bad may happen. A complex is not just a memory. It is a living pattern that activates in the present and makes the present feel older than it is. So when someone's disappointment rises, your body may react as if you were 9 years old again. When someone goes cold, you may feel the old terror of being cast out. When someone withdraws affection, you may not simply feel sadness. You may feel a primitive need to repair, to perform, to become useful again. That is why some people do not merely fear conflict. They fear the emotional consequences of not rescuing the connection. And that fear can make kindness dangerous, because then kindness is no longer rooted in freedom. It is rooted in panic. You are not giving because you are full. You are giving because you are afraid of what happens if you stop. That is a very different energy. It looks gentle. It may even look selfless, but underneath it there is often a quiet violence against the self, a slow betrayal, the kind that does not leave bruises on the skin, only a strange absence in the mirror. You know the feeling. You look fine. You function fine. You answer messages. You show up. You keep the calendar moving. You keep the conversation alive. You do what is expected, and yet some part of you has gone dim, not broken, just dimmed, like a lamp in the corner of a room that is still on, but no one has noticed it is no longer lighting anything. This is what happens when the persona of the good person becomes too strong. The shadow begins to collect everything you refuse to admit: resentment, exhaustion, anger, suspicion, the wish to disappear, the wish to stop being the one who always understands, the wish to let someone else hold the emotional weight for once, the wish to say, "No, I cannot," the wish to say, "That is not mine to fix," the wish to say, "I am tired of being available to people who only value my availability." But if you have lived too long in the role of the kind one, those feelings can frighten you. You may think they mean you are becoming cold. You may think they mean you are becoming hard. You may think they mean you are losing your heart. In reality, they may be the first signs that your heart is trying to protect itself. There is a difference between cruelty and clarity, between indifference and discernment, between withdrawal as punishment and withdrawal as self-respect. Many people confuse them because they have never been allowed to have clean boundaries without guilt attached to them. So when you begin to pull back, even a little, the guilt can feel enormous. You may feel it in your stomach, in your throat, in the strange urge to send one more message, to explain one more time, to soften one more boundary so no one feels too uncomfortable. And that is often the exact moment the old pattern tries to pull you back in. Because the moment you stop feeding the dynamic becomes visible. While you are over-explaining, the attention stays on your words. When you become quiet, the structure underneath starts to show itself. You begin to notice who respects your no and who only respected your yes. You notice who becomes warm only when you are useful. You notice who calls you kind when what they really mean is convenient. That realization can hurt more than the original conflict, because what hurts is not only that you were taken for granted. What hurts is that you participated in your own disappearance for the sake of keeping the bond intact. This is not blame. It is the beginning of freedom. The unconscious always prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar truth. Familiar pain feels controllable. You know the rules. You know how to survive it. You know how to be the good one, the helpful one, the forgiving one. But unfamiliar truth asks something more dangerous of you. It asks you to let the fantasy die. The fantasy that if you just give enough, they will finally see you. The fantasy that if you are patient enough, the imbalance will correct itself. The fantasy that if you explain your heart well enough, they will handle it with care. The fantasy that your compassion can heal a dynamic that requires reciprocity, not sacrifice. And this is where the shadow enters in a very real way. Because the shadow is not only the dark thing in other people, it is also the disowned force in you that says, I am done. I do not want this anymore. I am not here to be drained. I am not responsible for your emotional management. I can care about you without surrendering myself. That voice may feel unfamiliar at first, even harsh, especially if you have built your identity around being soft, understanding, and endlessly available. But the shadow is not evil. It is often just the part of you that has been exiled for too long. And when it returns, it can feel like coldness. This is why so many people panic the first time they set a real boundary. They expect to feel empowered immediately. Instead, they often feel grief, guilt, trembling, a strange emptiness, a sense that they have done something wrong even when they have done something healthy. That does not mean the boundary is bad. It means the boundary is new. The psyche resists anything that breaks an old survival strategy. If you were praised for being easy, then being firm may feel like betrayal. If you were rewarded for emotional labor, then resting may feel like laziness. If you were loved most when you were useful, then being less available may feel like risking love itself. That is why this work is not about becoming harder. It is about becoming more honest. Honest about what drains you. Honest about what you tolerate. Honest about where your kindness becomes self-erasure. Honest about the part of you that keeps hoping love will be earned through overfunctioning. Because love that requires you to disappear is not love that can hold your whole self. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. The strange thing is that many people do not become free the moment they leave a harmful dynamic. They become free the moment they stop calling the dynamic love when it is actually a repetition of old fear. That is a turning point. Not because the other person suddenly changes, and not because you become perfect, but because your inner language changes. You stop saying, "How do I make them understand me?" and start asking, "Why am I still negotiating for basic respect?" You stop saying, "How do I be kinder?" and start asking, "Why does my kindness keep costing me my center?" You stop saying, "What do they need from me?" and start asking, "What part of me keeps volunteering to be consumed?" That question matters, because it moves the focus from their behavior to your pattern of participation. Not to blame yourself, to reclaim your power. Power, in this context, is not domination. It is not control. It is not the ability to make someone behave. It is the ability to remain with yourself when the old guilt tries to pull you away from your own boundary. That is a very different kind of strength. It is quieter, less dramatic, less impressive to people who need you to stay overextended. But it is real. And once it begins, something subtle happens in the body. You stop bracing every time your phone lights up. You stop rehearsing explanations in your head. You stop treating every silence as an emergency. You stop making other people's disappointment larger than your own exhaustion. You stop confusing emotional access with intimacy. That last one is important, because some people have access to your time, your attention, your empathy, your patience, your calm voice, your problem solving, your forgiveness. But access is not the same as closeness. A person can know how to reach you and still not know how to meet you. And if you were trained to equate being needed with being loved, that distinction can change your whole life. The person who only feels connection when you are useful is not seeing your soul. They are using your function. That may be hard to admit, especially if you are naturally warm, especially if you believe in seeing the best in people, especially if you have a deep fear of becoming hard-hearted. But clarity does not make you cruel. It just makes you harder to manipulate. And that is often the real threat. Not that you will stop caring, but that you will stop confusing care with compliance. There is a moment in every honest recovery where you realize that your softness has been treated like a public resource. open to everyone, protected by no one. And then you begin to understand why some people become suspicious of your gentleness. Not because gentleness is weak, but because gentleness without boundaries can be exploited for a very long time. This is where the ego enters the picture. The ego loves identity. It loves a familiar role. If you have been the one who understands, then the ego will defend that role even when it is harming you, because the ego would rather be injured than uncertain. It would rather be praised than free. It would rather be useful than unseen. It would rather be the reliable one than the honest one. But individuation asks for something else. Individuation is not a fancy word for self-improvement. It is the painful, beautiful process of becoming more whole, more aligned with what is true, even when what is true disrupts the old image of who you thought you had to be. Sometimes individuation begins the moment you disappoint the version of yourself that was built to survive everyone else. That can feel like loss. It is also a return to the self, which is not the same as the persona. The self is deeper, less performative, less anxious. It does not need to be liked by everyone. It does not need to over-explain. It does not need to rescue every emotional mess to prove it is good. It knows the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. And the more you start to live from that center, the less power the old dynamic has over you. Not because the other person becomes powerless, because you stop handing over your center piece by piece. You may still feel sadness. You may still grieve the version of the relationship you hoped for. You may still miss the feeling of being needed. You may even catch yourself wanting to slip back into the old role on difficult days. That is normal. Patterns do not disappear because you understand them once. They loosen slowly, through repetition, through awareness, through moments of choosing yourself when the old reflex wants to choose the familiar wound. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is simply pause before you respond. Pause before you say yes. Pause before you apologize. Pause before you explain. Pause before you rescue. Pause long enough to ask, am I being loving or am I being trained? That question can save you from years of emotional leakage. Because being nice is not the same as being kind. Being nice often means avoiding tension at any cost. Being kind can include tension if that tension protects truth. Being nice can say yes while the body says no. Being kind can say no without hatred. Being nice can keep a connection alive by starving the self. Being kind can let a false connection die, so something real can eventually grow. That is the deeper truth most people avoid. They think the problem is that they are too generous. Often the real problem is that they have mistaken self-erasure for love, and the body keeps paying for it. The tight jaw, the shallow breath, the heaviness after every conversation, the irritation you feel but do not express, the way you keep replaying a sentence someone said, not because it was dramatic, but because something in you felt small when you heard it. The way you say, it's fine, and your stomach knows it is not. The body is honest in ways the persona is not. It tells you when you are safe. It tells you when you are performing. It tells you when you are crossing your own line. It tells you when your compassion has become a corridor with no exit. And if you want one practical test, let it be this. After you help, after you listen, after you give, do you feel more like yourself or less like yourself? That answer is often the most accurate one you have. If you feel more yourself, your kindness is aligned. If you feel less yourself, something has been taken from the wrong place. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself tonight. Not for anyone else, just one honest sentence. Something like, I am allowed to stop being available to what drains me. Or, my care does not require my disappearance. Or, I can be loving without becoming a doorway for my own loss. Because the moment you speak the truth clearly, the old spell weakens. Not all at once, not magically, but enough. Enough for you to notice the next time your phone lights up and your body does not rush to answer. Enough for you to notice the next time someone tries to make your boundary sound like cruelty. Enough for you to notice that guilt is not always a moral signal. Sometimes it is just the noise made by an old role losing its grip. And maybe that is the real transformation here. Not becoming colder, not becoming suspicious, not becoming hard, becoming unavailable to self-betrayal. There is a kind of peace that begins when you stop treating your exhaustion as evidence that you are failing. Sometimes, exhaustion is simply the truth finally asking for a voice. Sometimes, resentment is not ugliness, it is information. Sometimes the part of you that feels mean is actually the first part that has told the truth in years. Let it speak carefully. Let it speak honestly. Let it speak without needing to destroy anyone. You do not need to punish the people who benefited from your overgiving in order to reclaim your life. You only need to stop feeding the pattern that taught them your boundaries were optional. That may change the relationship. It may not. That is not the point. The point is that your kindness no longer has to be a door through which you disappear. The point is that you can stand in the same room, answer the same phone, hear the same silence, and no longer betray yourself to keep the peace. And when that happens, the room feels different. Not because everyone else changed, because you did not leave yourself in it. So the next time you feel the urge to be nice at your own expense, pause. Feel your feet. Notice your breath. Ask whether the yes in your mouth is also a yes in your body. If it is not, let the no be simple. Let it be calm. Let it be enough. That is not coldness. That is your return to yourself. And if you are only just beginning to see this, be gentle with yourself. Patterns like this do not form because you are foolish. They form because somewhere along the way, being easy to love felt safer than being fully real. They form because your nervous system learned a strategy that once helped you belong. They form because your heart was trying, in its own imperfect way, to keep connection alive. So do not shame the part of you that said yes too quickly. Do not shame the part of you that stayed too long. Do not shame the part of you that kept hoping kindness would eventually be returned. Just see it clearly now. See how often your niceness was actually a plea. See how often your patience was actually fear. See how often your empathy was asked to do the work of someone else's accountability. And then, slowly, begin to choose differently. Not dramatically, not with a speech, not with a grand declaration meant to prove you have changed. Just in small, steady ways that your body can trust. A slower reply, a shorter explanation, a cleaner no, a pause before rescuing, a refusal to apologize for having limits, a willingness to let someone feel disappointed without making that disappointment your emergency. These small acts matter because they teach the body something new. They teach it that connection does not always require self-sacrifice. They teach it that tension is not always danger. They teach it that you can remain loving without remaining available to harm. And over time, that changes the whole inner landscape. The chest loosens, the jaw unclenches, the mind becomes less crowded, the old panic softens. Your energy starts to return to you in pieces, not all at once, but enough. Enough to notice beauty again without immediately wondering who needs something from you. Enough to answer a message without bracing for what it will cost. Enough to sit alone without feeling guilty for not being useful. Enough to remember that your presence was never meant to be a service. There is a quieter life waiting on the other side of overgiving. It is not a life without compassion. It is a life where compassion has a home. It is not a life without relationships. It is a life where relationships are no longer built on your disappearance. It is not a life without tenderness. It is a life where tenderness includes you. And if no one has told you this clearly enough, let it be said now. You are allowed to be kind and still be hard to use. You are allowed to care and still say no. You are allowed to be soft and still have boundaries that do not bend for guilt. You are allowed to stop making yourself small just because someone else has grown comfortable with your shrinking. That is not the end of your goodness. It is the beginning of your wholeness. So if this message found you at the edge of exhaustion, if you recognized yourself in the room that always gets quieter after you leave, if you felt the old ache of being the one who understands too much and asks for too little, then take this with you tonight. Your kindness was never the problem. Your self-abandonment was. And now that you can see the difference, you do not have to lose yourself to be loved anymore.